Good morning, everyone. This morning I'm going to show you how to make some homemade bagels, which you might think might sound a little bit difficult, but it's actually very simple and only requires a few ingredients and a few tools. So let's get started. Okay, so the first ingredient that you need 3.5 cups of bread flour. If you don't have bread flour, you can use all-purpose flour. It just doesn't have as much gluten in it, so it might not be as doughy of a bagel, but they will come out just fine if you only have all-purpose flour. You also are going to need 2 teaspoons of sugar, 1 3/4 teaspoons of salt, 2.5 teaspoons of dry active yeast. You can either purchase a jar like this in the grocery store of the active dry yeast, or if you buy 1 packet of active dry yeast, that is equal to 2 1/4 teaspoon of the active dry yeast. So you can just dump that packet right in, you don't have to measure it. And then you're also going to need 1 1/3 cup of lukewarm water. It's really important with the lukewarm water that's not too hot. You don't want it above 115. You don't want to kill the yeast. You don't want to have flat bagels, or as we call them in New York, flagels. So you want to make sure that your water is between 105 and 115. So for the tools for this recipe, you don't really need that many tools. If you have a KitchenAid, you're going to use the dough hook for the KitchenAid to get started. If you don't have a KitchenAid, I'm going to show you just how to stir it all by hand and knead it by hand. You need some parchment paper to put down on your baking sheet, like this. You also need a nice big pot that eventually you're going to put some water in it to boil, and you are going to eventually put your bagels in here. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do to get started is I'm going to take my bread flour, my sugar, my salt, and my dry active yeast, and add all of those ingredients together, and I'm just going to stir it up until everything is combined. Okay, once I have my yeast, my sugar, my salt, and my flour combined, I'm going to go ahead and add my 1 1/3 cups of lukewarm water. And I'm going to stir this for about 3 to 4 minutes until it starts to form a dough and starts to kind of pull off the sides of the bowl. So it's going to start looking like this. Okay, once you have kneaded your dough for 3 to 4 minutes, you are going to continue to knead your dough outside of the bowl if you're doing it by hand. If you are doing it in a KitchenAid, you're just going to turn your speed. You're going to turn your speed up 1 notch, and you're going to knead it for 10 minutes in the KitchenAid. So I'm going to show you how to knead it by hand. So I'm going to start kneading my dough by hand. I'm going to put a little bit of flour on my hand so that the dough doesn't stick to my hands. And I'm just going to fold and press with the palm of my hand. And I'm going to do this until I have a nice smooth ball of dough. Once you have that nice smooth ball of dough, you don't want to continue just playing with the dough and kneading the dough. What could happen is you can actually over mix the dough and develop too much gluten, which would turn your bagels kind of tough and not give it such a nice texture. So you just want to knead it enough, and then once you think you have a nice smooth ball of dough, you can stop kneading the dough. Okay, you don't want to squeeze the dough like that. You want to fold and press. Okay, so I have a nice smooth ball of dough, so I'm gonna stop here. Once you have your ball of dough all kneaded, the last thing you're gonna do for this step of the recipe is you are going to take a glass bowl or a metal bowl, something about like a medium size, because your dough is gonna double in size. So you wanna make sure that it's not too small where when your dough starts to rise, it kind of comes over the bowl. So you wanna give your dough enough room to grow. And then all you're gonna do is you're gonna take either some cooking spray or some vegetable oil, and you just wanna spray the inside of the bowl so that as your dough starts to rise, it doesn't stick to the sides. It'll make it easier to take out of the bowl once the dough is completely risen. So take my dough, I'm gonna put it in my glass bowl. I'm gonna cover my dough and I'm gonna let it sit for about an hour, and then I will be back to show you guys how to finish the bagel recipe. Welcome back, everyone. We are going to get started with the second part of this recipe. So I've let my dough sit for about an hour. It's doubled in size, so it's ready to go to start making our bagels. For this step of the recipe, you're going to have your dough that's doubled, your seasonings that you choose. I have everything but the bagel seasoning. Either tongs or a slotted spoon to put the bagels into the boiling water and also take them out. Your parchment paper on top of your baking sheet, and water that I have starting to boil. So what you want to do is you want to get your water boiling. Your pot should be big enough to fit 2 bagels at a time, and you want to fill your pot up about halfway with water. We're going to bring this water to a boil, and then before we add our bagels, we're going to actually turn down the heat and turn it to a simmer to cook our bagels. So in the meantime, I'm going to get started with rolling out the dough and getting it into the bagel shape. So I'm going to start by flouring my work surface once again, and I'm going to knead my dough for just a couple of seconds, make sure all the air bubbles are out. Again, I'm not over kneading this. I'm just kind of making sure that I don't have any extra air bubbles. Once I have my dough kneaded again, I'm going to start dividing my dough into 8 equal size balls of dough. So with each of these balls of dough, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to press my thumb through the middle of the dough to form that bagel shape and kind of stretch the dough the best you can, and you want a nice big hole. The bagel actually won't have this giant hole once it goes into the boiling water. But if you don't make it big enough, what happens is it actually shrinks, and then you don't actually have a hole in the middle of your bagel. So you're gonna go ahead and do that for all 8 of your bagels. Now that my water is boiling, I'm gonna turn it down to a simmer before I start adding my bagels. Okay, so my water is down to a simmer, so what I'm gonna do is with 2 bagels at a time, I'm gonna take my tongs and just gently place the bagel into the simmering water. And I'm gonna let them cook for 1 minute on each side, and then I'm gonna flip them to the next side and cook it for another minute. Okay, once it's been a minute on the second side, you're gonna remove the bagels from the boiling water, and you're gonna put them right back onto the parchment paper. And you wanna add your anything seasoning right away while the bagels are still have water on them so that the seasoning adheres to the bagels. So now you're just going to repeat those steps with the rest of the bagels that you have left. Again, you want to do 2 bagels at a time. You don't want to overcrowd the water. And 1 minute on each side. So I have all of my bagels done. I've added everything seasoning to most of my bagels. I left a couple of them plain. One extra step, if you would like to do it, you could put a little bit of egg wash on the plain bagels to give it a nice golden color. I usually just tend to leave it. And now you're gonna put these in the oven at 425 degrees. All right, everyone, I hope you enjoyed learning how to make some homemade bagels. Check out the recipe in the description of the exact information of how to make it with the ingredients and everything like that. This is my final product. I hope you guys enjoy them. See you soon.